The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of A Man for All Seasons, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of this fine 1966 movie. And joining me today on the panel are Mike Denz. Hey, Mike.
Hey, guys.
And Mike Creavey. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good, thanks. It's the Mike and Mike Show.
I just realized that. I was like, oh no, we've done this before though.
Yes. When necessary, I will try to refer to you by your last names, and that way everyone will be okay. Folks, before we get started, I want to encourage you to write a review of the podcast at Apple Podcasts, and please share it with your friends. If you enjoy this show, your friends are sure to enjoy it as well, and that helps us grow the community. The only way this show grows really is by you sharing it with others. And I want to tell you about another show on the network you're sure to enjoy. And actually, this is very appropriate. It was a random choice. Pray Station Portable is a daily podcast. It comes in 5 parts a day, and it's the daily prayer of the church, the divine office, it's sometimes called. And it is a wonderful way to pray along with the whole church together. So you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/PSP. So we are talking about today about the 1966 version of the movie A Man for All Seasons. There have been other versions. There's a 1988 version starring Charlton Heston. There were several others in the 50s and 60s, but this is the most famous one, partly because it was so good. It won so many Academy Awards. I didn't even count, but it was like everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Paul Scofield, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, and nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Robert Shaw as King Henry, and Wendy Hiller, who played his daughter Margaret, Thomas's daughter Margaret. I think. Wait, no, that was Susanna York. Wendy Hiller was Alice, his wife.
Was it Alice? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, all that said, it was preamble. It is just kind of give a quick recap in case you're not familiar, but you should definitely watch the movie before we discuss. This is based on the true life story of Saint Thomas More, the martyr who died at the hand of. Yes, spoilers. Yes, at the hand of King Henry VIII for refusing to go along with the king's wishes with regard to his desire to divorce and disobey the Pope. But we'll definitely get more into that because there's more nuance to that story than what I just said. It stars Paul Scofield as Thomas More and a great cast. We'll talk about the cast a little more in a second. But I want to start off by first noting that the day we record this, we're recording this on May 19th, is the anniversary of the death of Anne Boleyn in 1536.
I did not know that.
I didn't know that till I just happened upon that fact today. I was reading in the newspaper, and it's like, no way. What a weird coincidence. Anne Boleyn, of course, figuring quite prominently in the story of St. Thomas More. So yes, I thought that was interesting. But what I really want to start with is your history, your background with this movie. I will confess, this was the first time I'd seen it.
Really?
I have a list of a handful of movies that everyone I know has seen, and I have not. And it's just one of those things where I just haven't got around to it, and I need to. And this was a great excuse for me to do that. Another one is Babette's Feast. I know everyone who's ever been to Steubenville apparently is required to watch that or while they're there. I somehow missed that sort of thing. And there's a few others like that. My wife introduced me to Babette's to Casablanca when we were dating. I watched The Godfather for the first time for this podcast, that sort of thing. So another first for me. So that's my background with A Man for All Seasons. But Mike Denz, what's your background with it?
I was introduced to it by one of my best friends, probably in the neighborhood of 25, 27 years ago, when we were in Steubenville, or at least I'm not like in Steubenville, but we both lived in Buffalo too. So he probably, yeah, I'm thinking they might have showed it to me then too. And so I remember he would like introduce me to all these like holy movies like Beckett and all these different things, that, what was the one Nazi one about
Scarlet and the Red?
Scarlet and the Red. I'm like, it has red in it. Scarlet and Red.
Yeah.
Awesome movies. If we haven't done those, we should do those too. But
yeah.
So this is it wasn't one of those movies where I'm like, oh, I want to see that again. I mean, I watched it. It was really compelling. I really liked it. And then when I saw we were going to do a podcast for this, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like to do that. I'll watch it again. And really the history of it for me is just, I love Thomas More, and Saint Thomas More, and the reason for why he's a martyr, I think, is very unique. And so that's kind of, I think we're going to get into more of the actual saint that it's based on later. But so my affection for the saint is probably one of the biggest things.
Excellent. How about you, Mike Creavey?
Oh, I feel a little pressure here just because by default I've probably seen it. Oh, geez, I've probably seen it between 12 and 20 times at least. And I don't know why. What's funny is, so we watched it in Mrs. Roan's 12th grade English class.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Roan. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea.
Yeah, you know her now. So Mrs. Roan's 12th grade English class. And what's funny is, I went to, so I did public school K through 12. And, at the time, at least, it was a pretty, as far as like public schools go, like it was a pretty like faith friendly public school. Like, a lot of the craziness you hear about now, like it certainly wasn't going on there. And so I was very fortunate that, we had a lot of teachers who were, not overtly, kind of sharing faith necessarily, but they were never like hostile to it. And I don't think she showed it to us because of that specifically. I think it's because it was, somehow connected to its place within English history, or the connection to that story. Now, I don't have any memory of knowing anything about Thomas More before that. I don't know how much, just where I was at my own faith at the time, like how much that specific, kind of aspect of it was driving my interest, but it definitely brought that up to the top, I think, or brought it to the surface a little more. And I think from the get-go, and I know we'll get into this a lot, it's so quotable, and there's just so many great lines all throughout it. And as I understand it, as I've learned more about it over the years, like a lot of it, comes from, certain writing. I mean, he wrote so much, in his life. So I've read a couple biographies on Moore. I've really grown, like Mike was saying. I just love him as a saint, and he's just an intriguing person to learn about. And so, of course, this is a movie. There's dramatic license throughout it, that kind of thing. But I think a lot of the dialogue, a lot of his speeches, a lot of those things are based on things he wrote, based on the way he talked. And in some cases, at the end, as we'll get to, based on certain court testimony too, I think, from his actual trial. So I love that aspect of it.
Yeah. The play itself, the movie itself is based on a play adapted from the play by the playwright to a movie script. Robert Bolt wrote both. And I get the sense, I've read some things about Thomas More. I've kind of delved into a biography once, and it has that feel. The one thing that is interesting to me about the movie, though, is you do get a sense that he's pious and devoted, but you don't get the saintly man of the Catholic faith sense that you don't. It doesn't come through as much. It's not a knock against the movie. It's just that's not what the movie was showing, I think, there.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and he was, I just looked it up because he wasn't canonized till 1935, it's like 400 years later. Right. So I don't know what the process was there, but yeah. Yeah.
You would think the Pope that he was defending be like, hey, we're canonizing him right away. I mean, well, he just stood up for me like that. In
fact, I mean, I'd say almost the opposite. If the Pope is trying to deal with this very delicate situation, canonizing the guy who was at the center of it might have actually made it even worse.
If he was trying to heal things, I suppose that would be something.
That's a good point.
But it is true that it used to be canonization processes would take hundreds of years. I mean, it actually did take a long time.
Yeah.
Our rapid processes today are an aberration in many ways.
Isn't that even like Dom? I think didn't you and Jimmy just recently that came up in one of the recent shows about Joan of Arc, not being canonized until, it was longer than that, right?
Yes. Yeah. So. I mean, there are saints, like people who were held as saints in their lifetime who it took hundreds of years for them to get canonized. I think Saint Olaf. There's one who's like a national saint, the sort of the patron saint of a nation, and it again took ages. But so it's not necessarily a knock against them for that it took so long. But yeah, it is interesting though that the title itself is an interesting title, A Man for All Seasons, and I was pondering like what do we mean by that? What do you guys think of the title and what it might mean to say that Thomas More is a man for all seasons?
I'm hoping Mike Creavey knows this because I looked it up, read the reason, and didn't understand it. So
okay.
It went over my head.
I'm trying to find the quote. Oh man, because I was looking at this the other day.
This would be a good thing to know. Why do they call it A Man for All Seasons?
Yeah, I should have had that.
And
Wikipedia says that Bolt borrowed it from Robert Whittington, who was a contemporary of Thomas More. And it says, the quote is, More is a man of an angel's will in singular learning. I know not of his fellow, for where is the man of that gentleness, lowliness, and affability? And his time requires of a man of marvelous mirth and pastimes, and sometimes of as sad gravity, a man for all seasons.
Yeah, that's what I read, and I didn't get what that meant.
I just off the top of my head, I wonder if, and I think this comes across in the movie too, and just reading about him and just, you have this guy who is, I mean, he's one of the most cultured men in Europe. I mean, he's known across the continent. He's this incredibly, erudite, serious scholar, as a man of law and science and culture. He's just this really classically educated guy, best friends with Erasmus, and by the same token, he's known for like his really kind of cutting edge wit. There's a real sort of, I don't know, like an affability, a down to earthness about him at the same time. Maybe it's something along those lines too, that there's this, he's not just this stiff legal political kind of figure, like he travels in those circles, but he's a completely not a man that's bribable, and I love, we'll talk about that more, like seeing the people around him just being very honest about like, his friend later is saying like, why can't you come along with us? It's disproportionate.
Yes.
It's like, we're supposed to be arrogant. We're supposed to, and it's like, he's not like that.
I love that line. It's disproportionate. I mean, this is, well, and that's one of the things I like about why he's a saint, like it's disproportionate. You don't need to die for this, it's just, there's other things. And I use the story of Thomas More when I'm teaching about the importance of the truths of our faith, that he didn't die because he wouldn't deny Christ. He didn't deny because he wouldn't burn incense to some pagan god. He died because he wouldn't deny the authority of the Pope. That's and here we have like live in a post Christendom world where so many people will easily deny the authority of the Pope, by the way, and just say, no, he can't tell me. And here we have a man who went to his death and said, I will not deny the authority of the Pope.
Right.
So it's just it's such an inspiration.
So what I think the title really refers to partially is from Whittington's quotation there. I was wondering, as a man for all seasons, he's through thick and thin, through good times and in bad, he is a constant companion who's always there for you. He's always has the right thing to say. He always has the right attitude. He's always ready when it's time to party, he's there to party. When it's time to mourn, he is there to mourn. He is a man for all the seasons of life. And I think that really comes across in this movie, as you guys both said.
Yeah.
He's a guy who was constant. He was a constant, almost to a fault. Even his wife, I think, gets frustrated with him, at points where he's just constantly will not bend, will not not even as much as he wants to. Like you can tell at times, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go. There are times when you can tell he just wants to say it and just get it over with for the sake of others, because of the pain that it's causing others. But he can't, because it would be wrong. And I think that's really what makes Moore a saint, is as much as he wants to do the wrong thing for the right reasons, if you know what I mean, he just can't do the wrong thing. It would be wrong. It would separate him from God, and that is the worst thing possible.
And he's a servant and a friend of the king.
Yes.
Up until the end, and he says so. And that's another man for all seasons. As we go through the movie, I forget his title before he became chancellor, but then they took that away, and then they took everything away, and then they put him in the Tower of London, and he's still the same man through all these seasons. And then, of course, they have the imagery of showing the seasons while he's in that kind of we're not going to say the title, but we'll show you the title.
Yeah, right.
And,
that's true.
And he reminds me, and I'm not. I mean, I've read different books on the saints and stuff like that, but I think for some reason he reminds me of Saint Padre Pio because of his wit, his like sharp wit. Padre Pio is known to tell it as it is. And some of the ways he acted, and he would do that, especially with Richie Rich. I keep thinking of the cartoon character, Rich. Yeah. And I mean, John Hurt is unrecognizable compared to what what a young man he is in this movie.
Yeah.
I kept waiting for the alien to burst out of his chest.
It's just like, and he plays such just such a worm of a guy,
a callow, shallow man.
And the way Moore has the ability to just assess his character and try to steer him in a way that that he can handle. Like this isn't something you can handle. This is a lot of pressure, and you'll be better off, kind of the near occasion of sin. And so even with his, just embarrassing this guy, and you can almost blame him for his downfall in the sense that he pushed him towards
Cromwell.
Yeah. But still, that's the saintly, like the saints aren't just like these super nice people who are all gentle. They're tough when they have to be tough. And that's kind of where I saw it.
So let's talk a little bit about the cast. You mentioned John Hurt playing a very young John Hurt playing Richard Rich. We have Paul Scofield as St. Thomas More. We mentioned Wendy Hiller as Alice More. Leo McKern as Thomas Cromwell. You might, if you know any British TV, you might know him from Rumpel and the Bailey. He played that. Orson Welles as the unctuous Cardinal Wolsey, almost a character from Dune. So evil. Robert Shaw as King Henry VIII. Mike Denz. We were just talking about Robert Shaw in Jaws.
I thought it was so funny. This is like the second Thursday in a row we're talking about Robert Shaw, and it's really hard not to see Quint in King Henry VIII, which is really weird. And for me, I'm not a dialect person, but Robert Shaw sounds more like a Scottish Irish, so it was kind of weird for King Henry VIII to have. Maybe it's a
Scots Irish accent, but
it just sounds more Scottish or Irish than English the way he talks, and I just thought it was kind of funny. But he was born in England. I mean, I don't know if that's where he was raised,
but his King Henry VIII was so like almost unhinged at times, it just reminded me of that slightly unhinged Quint from Jaws, which was good.
He might have been drinking on this set too, who knows.
every time, like that's one of my favorite scenes. It's just so uncomfortable,
Which one?
The surprise,
the surprise, quote unquote surprise dinner, visit. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just so, and I'm sitting there and thinking, man, I've been to some awkward faculty meetings, or I've been to some, and it's like, good Lord, that is just like, I'm pulling my collar back. Like I'm sitting on the couch, my wife and I are watching, and I'm like, I've seen this a lot, and it never gets more comfortable.
So everyone can hear him through the windows and all the sycophants following around, and oh my God.
I want to dig into that scene in a bit, but I just want to finish the other casting is Vanessa Redgrave shows up as Anne Boleyn, which is I think that's for stars that most people would notice, I think that really is but there's other people that if you watch old movies, you'll have seen them in other things. Susanna York is Margaret, that sort of thing. So we do start with his summoning by Cardinal Wolsey, and we have
Dom. I'm so sorry to interrupt. But just before the one thing about the cast, I want to mention. I don't know if you saw this because I didn't know this, but I guess I think Bolt wanted, or the team they really insisted on Schofield for the role.
Yeah.
And to have Leo McKern, I guess, who had also been in the stage production, but in a different role, I think, or they tweaked it or something because they had such a presence. And so I think that's important to point out, too, just as far as like when you watch it, like it just feels so right. And I think it's because there had been, for at least some of these main guys, these major players, right? Like they really knew it so well.
I don't know if it's for the same character, but there's only a handful of people who've won a Tony and an Oscar for.
Right.
And this is for the same character that Schofield did it.
Yeah. In the play, Leo McKern played the common man, which was a character that did not show up in the movie for obvious reasons, but it got divided up into several different characters. So there was the common man who just kept showing up in different places to kind of ground him, but in the movie those lines were given to, let's see, the boatman at the beginning, the Thames boatman, Thomas More's steward Michael, the servant, an innkeeper Matthew.
Matthew. I love him.
I don't know why I said Michael.
Michael's on your brain. That's all.
I know. I get Michael's all around. It's Michael's all the way down. An innkeeper, the jailer in the tower, the jury foreman, and the executioner were all played by one man in the play, as a sense of a through line of that this is the people of England, right? That who are all there in the midst of all this. So I thought that was very interesting. Yeah. But yeah, that was Leo McKern in the stage play. But it is cool that they brought these actors over to the movie to kind of connect it. It's like if they made a movie out of Hamilton, you'd want to see Lin-Manuel as Alexander, and you'd want to see the other actors, which now that's a whole nother thing. And I only have room in my brain for one thing at a time. So let's keep this one here. But the other actors that we were familiar with. All right. Yeah. So digging in. So we have Orson Welles' Wolsey summoning the Moore to his palace in the middle of the night. It's sort of as a power play. It's quite the power play. Just a midnight summons, and Moore goes because it's what he does. He's obedient. And what he wants is, in case people aren't familiar, Henry wants an heir. He wants a male heir, and his wife at the time, Catherine of Aragon, Queen Catherine, has not produced a surviving male baby. She's had a couple babies. They have died or miscarried, and now he wants out so that he can marry his mistress in Boleyn. And the justification, and this is an important point, which I think it's kind of ignored a lot in Catholic circles, but Henry had a justification that he was advancing, which is that Catherine was his brother's widow, and it was considered at the time in the law and in the church law to be incestuous for a man to marry his brother's widow. Wasn't allowed, and he had to get a special dispensation from the Pope in order to do so. Catherine was to maintain alliances with Spain and good relations with Spain, because Catherine was a princess of Spain, and so he had gotten that dispensation from the Pope, and now Henry wanted to set her aside and divorce her on the grounds of, well, that was an illegal marriage. That should never have happened. The Pope should never have allowed that. Mike Denz, what do you think?
One of the interesting things was later on in the movie, with the big scene of the visit with Henry and Thomas More, Henry quotes a line of scripture where you're not supposed to do this. Yeah. And Thomas More starts to quote, I believe, a Leviticus scripture, and Henry cuts him off. But the scripture is that if your brother's wife didn't ever bear any children, then you can take her into your, then it's okay. Right. Now that's different from the church. I mean, the church law was whatever, but that's what Thomas More was going for there in that sense. So it's interesting. Only when the Pope's decrees work for Henry does he like them.
Right. And the church had a different relationship with the Catholic kings of the era, because Henry was still a Catholic king. Whereas there was this sense that among the kings that they were somewhat equal to the Pope in being leaders of the church. The Pope led in religious matters, but the kings led in the societal matters. And so there was this they saw themselves as much more equals. So that's the thing we have to keep in mind when we look at these historical events, that were occurring. And that's one of the reasons why Henry felt like he had a case to be made. But in any respect, Henry wanted out. He wanted an heir. And Wolsey demands of Thomas, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, what are you going to do about Henry's desire for an heir? And Thomas's line is, the king needs no advice from me in that area. like, as in, I'm sure the king knows how babies are made. Which is not what Wolsey was saying, but, Thomas, being very clever, says it.
And isn't Wolsey just such a, it's so clear in Orson Welles' portrayal of him that, this isn't about God. This isn't about Christ. This isn't about, and it's, this is encouraging for me and I'm not, of course, not, getting into any stuff going on in the world now, but, we run into sometimes, unfortunately, clergy or even bishops sometimes who it's just like your jaw drops and you're like, how can that be? And it's like, it shouldn't be, but it's always been.
Yeah.
And it's, that's encouraging for me, at least in the sense that, like, it helps you remember that there's nothing new under the sun.
Right. Jesus was an apostle. Yeah.
And, and all the political machinations and everything. And I just love, there's so many things in that one scene. I can't remember all of them, but just, like him kind of mocking Thomas, like, oh, you'd want to rule the country with prayers. He's like, yes, I really would. Like, okay.
I want to ask you guys this, because as I was watching it, and I searched to see pictures of Wolsey if I was right on this, and I couldn't find a one. But the way they had the lighting and the makeup and the shot of him, it looked like a painting. It looked like a two-dimensional painting. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
I mean, he really just kind of appeared like he was just supposed to be sitting still, and it was a painting he was looking at. Yet it moved, and it was very. I don't know if that's what they went for.
His skin was very pale and sallow and unhealthy looking. Very definitely. Yeah.
He's very in his place. He's just. It's almost like Jabba the Hutt. Like,
the backlighting was like non-existent. It just kind of was like dark.
Almost like a spider at the center of its web. I wonder if that was intentional.
Yeah.
So. There's this great moment where Wolsey says he wants to pressure the Pope to allow a divorce. He doesn't want the dynasty to end and bring about dynastic wars. And doesn't Thomas want to avoid a dynastic war? Wouldn't that be a worse end? And More has this great line where he says, when statesmen forsake their own private conscience for the sake of their public duties, they lead their country by a short route to chaos. And I want to carve that in stone and set that in front of the White House. I mean,
was going to say,
not necessarily commentary on this particular occupant, but it just in general.
Every state house, just, oh my goodness, wow.
This should be carved in stone in all places where legislators sit. But yes.
And we're going to come back. I want to save that quote I hinted at with you guys earlier for a little bit later, but that's, conscience is of course going to be this recurring theme,
Yes.
And I just love that right at the get-go, I mean, he has absolutely no reason whatsoever to even remotely suspect at this point that he's going to have his head cut off someday.
Right.
We're nowhere, there's nothing in law at any point that should justify that. And yet even now it's like you're already seeing the seed of the very thing that's going to, facilitate that.
Right.
When it's all said and done,
The seeds are laid in this scene, because then he's also given the silver cup that is they try to use against him later, as if he was being bribed for he was a judge, and so they claim that his judgment was conflict of interest, etc.
Now, didn't in this conversation, Thomas More said, well, we'll just have to appeal to the Pope again. And Wolsey's like, no, as if I want to do an end around the Pope or pressure, not, that's not going to work because the Pope won't give it to him. So we have to do something else. So it seemed to me like Wolsey, I could be wrong, already had the idea of what we need to do is just do it ourselves. And because the Pope is not going to go with us on this one.
I think that Wolsey had already decided that appealing to the Pope was a dead end, and they just needed to back Henry's justification and just go from there. So we follow Thomas back to his house and Chelsea, and there he has this actually. Both before and after he goes to see Wolsey, there's this young man, Richard Rich, we mentioned before, played by John Hurt, who is kind of just this young, he's typical of a young men trying to find their place in the world and looking for a patron to attach themselves to, who will then advance their fortunes in life. And he's kind of showed up with Moore and to see if Moore could hook him up with any of his friends. He's doing some networking, some little LinkedIn stuff here. And he tries to, the Duke of Norfolk notices him. He's like, who's this guy? Would you recommend him? I'm like, no. He's like, because he sees right through him. Like, he loves Richard Rich as a good young man but he sees his flaws, which is you do not belong at court. If you end up in court, at the court, like the court of the king, it will be your ruin. You will be corrupted by that. Go become, what does he say? Go become a teacher.
Be a teacher.
Take a safe, quiet job as a teacher. And Rich is like, but no one will ever know me. Your students will know you. The people of the school will know you. That's all that's important. That's
God
enough.
will know you.
God will know you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, he's a historical character, correct?
Oh, yes. He is an actual
And was
figure.
his name really Richard Rich?
Richard Rich.
Because that's like Oliver Twist kind of name. I mean, that's just a little bit on the nose.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
There is a priest of the Archdiocese of Boston named William Williams.
Well, still, but this guy's all about money, and his name is Richard Rich. So
I hadn't even thought of that aspect of it.
The poor
Yeah.
little
it's just
rich
really,
There was a comic book when I was a kid. I don't know if it's still around, called Richie Rich, the poor little rich boy, which I love those comics. They were so much fun. So then we have poor Thomas who can't get a rest. His daughter shows up. She's got her suitor there, William Roper, and he seems to be a very nice young man, very well set, with his profession. He's just got one problem: he's a heretic. Which is he's a Lutheran. He's accepted Martin Luther's heresies, and Thomas is adamant that until you reject those heresies, you will not marry my daughter. And Roper just is so precipitous, and in fact, at one point, he wants to to speak against the king on behalf of Thomas, sort of in defense of Thomas, and Thomas like, don't say anything in my presence that I will have to do something about, because that if Thomas will follow do his duty and have his potential son-in-law arrested.
That's on a much less serious note. Sometimes the high school students start having conversations that start heading in a direction. And I want to quote, there are some things I may not hear.
Yes.
Because if you say that sentence you're about to say, I have to write up paperwork, I don't want to do that. Just stop talking.
You don't want me to do that.
But I love when he's talking to Roper. I love that. That's one of my favorite lines too. And he's like, calls him a heretic, and he gets all upset. That's a word I don't like. He's like, it's not a likable word. It's not a likable thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's great. It's like, that's probably why you shouldn't be one. Right. I want to point out here that this is one of the points where I'm like, wow, what was 1966 like? I know that's a big upheaval in society and where social norms and accepted morality and stuff were really turning, but still, it just seemed awfully late for a movie where a Lutheran's called a heretic, and the ending of the movie is to the triumphant declaration that the Pope is the Vicar of Christ, wins Best Picture. Is how times have changed.
Yeah.
Yes, but things were, but there were still that's the thing is even in the 60s, you could still have movies that were this way. Like things didn't switch overnight. And so there were movies that had rejected the what had come before. And I mean, if you think about it, The Godfather was made 4 years after this came out. Like those are two very different kinds of movies from two different movie eras, even, it's just,
yeah, the look and everything of
I forget what the name it was. I was trying to look it up, but there was that, there was something in place, with certain, decency, kind of, regulations
the
and
League
stuff
of
for
Decency,
certain. But I forget the timing because I had a friend who was a filmmaker years ago who pointed out that I don't know if it was that or something similar to it that dissolved like the same year and was talking about the radical difference where you go from like this winning Best Picture to where it starts to go.
I think
a few short years later.
Jungle was the first movie come out after the League of Decency went away. And it was a watershed moment in movie making. So yeah, this right here is that switching point. And this movie you could almost consider to be the end of that era, that first era, and the beginning of the new.
I just want to also point out, since this is, where she becomes kind of prominent as a character, Susanna York, I love her. And I saw that she was in this, like, oh yeah, because number one, she's Superman's mom originally.
Yes.
And also she played Mrs. Cratchit in my favorite version of Christmas Carol with George C. Scott. And she gives a great speech about, we ought to toast a man like that, during the dinner scene where Bob Cratchit wants to toast him and she goes in a huff. But she was great in that too. And I mean, she's done over 100 films, so I'm not saying that's her claim to fame. Right. Those are the two things that make her near and dear to my heart.
Yes, she was really good in this, and in the character of Margaret. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Moore had more than one child. I think he had like a couple of daughters, and
I think he had three
from
daughters
his first
and a
wife.
son.
Yeah, and it was from his first wife who had died. His present wife didn't. She raised Margaret like it was her own, but that wasn't her real mother.
Okay, so but in this we kind of conflate them all. But my recollection is that his daughters were also like Margaret isn't here, very well educated, very well spoken, and on a par with their father in that intellectual department. So very interesting there. So Wolsey dies and Moore becomes the chancellor, which is the sort of the high position, the king's chief counselor in essence, the head of the king's privy council. And so at this point we have this, we mentioned before, the surprise quote unquote visit by King Henry VIII. And I love how they stage this. It's all very like over the top. Henry is almost manic. It's almost like he has he's almost what's the word, manic depressive, I think, like where
bipolar.
He's bipolar, where he goes from one extreme to the other, like a switch flipping. He's surrounded by sycophants, like all the courtiers. I just love how well all of this kind of is put together, and you get in this one scene a real sense of this is the state of the governance of this kingdom at this period in time, and the kind of craziness of the reign of Henry VIII. So it was really, and Robert Shaw does such a great job here with like just depicting this kind of crazy king.
And it's interesting, besides the wedding itself, where he thinks Moore is there later on, these are the only two scenes that Shaw is in, right? I don't think they have him in there yet. Which was, I was like, when I kind of was thinking back, I'm like, wow. I mean, like such a great character and everything. And I guess that's just the way the play was written, but that they didn't have more back and forth between him and Thomas and stuff like that was amazing. I think it
was a good choice because it makes Henry this background figure that looms over the situation, but isn't himself involved.
The shark, he's there.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry. I'm going back to the last week's movie. Oh, sorry.
And even though Thomas is the lone holdout among all the important people of England on Henry's behalf, on this question that Henry has, Henry desperately needs Thomas to be the one to say it's okay, because Thomas is the lone man of truth. Because if Thomas agrees with him, then everyone knows that this must be the right thing to do. And that, I mean, it's kind of amazing because he's the king. Just do it. Like if you got everybody but one guy on your side, what, just do it then. And he eventually does. But at this point, it's like he's holding out for Thomas. It's got to be Thomas. Sorry, another Hamilton reference.
And I'm just looking here because I should have, I just didn't have time. Unfortunately, I wanted to read up on, because another figure that kind of is mentioned, I think once, is St. John Fisher, who is the Bishop of Rochester, who was, I don't know I don't know if he was the only English, the only
bishop to hold out.
who didn't, but he of course was executed as well. And that's, Moore mentions him at the beginning when Wolsey's playing the game and being like, who do you think will wear this after me?
Right.
And he says, so-and-so, and he's my
Cromwell, me before Cromwell.
But that's, I love Moore's line. He's like, Fisher for me, like if it's up to him, he wants it to be Fisher. And then he's like, Cromwell, he's like, me instead of Cromwell. But that's, so that's, I don't know exactly what their relationship was. That's something I'd like to learn a little bit more about, but yeah, it's, that looming, I mean, it's what I'm particularly intrigued about, because what it made me do is it made me want to go read more biographies about like these individuals.
Yep.
And then Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was just not a great guy either.
Right.
But yeah, there's just so many interesting characters in it.
The whole thing with the visit, and is that what we're getting into now with and he, like, Thomas, we'll go and we'll talk. So the whole reason for this visit, because you can't phone him, is I want to make sure you're with me on this divorce. And it's supposed to be this secret little talk they're having in the garden, which everyone can hear through the windows. And once he's through with that, and there is that bipolar, like, you're my friend, sit, and then he gets all mad and then, like, and rails against the Pope, and who does he think he is? And then, he's calm again. And then he's like, well, I got to go. And like, they have a feast that they've carefully prepared inside. He didn't even look at it.
Right.
And like, we're off here, and he leaves his sycophants, like, staying on the beach. That was great. And the other part of this that it reminds me of is Moore and Henry VIII, to me, are like Herod and John the Baptist. Herod, and it's another marriage thing. It's very interesting. And this is, Herod married his brother's wife, and but he didn't want to. He liked listening to John the Baptist, and he didn't want to kill him. He threw him in prison to try to pacify his wife, but he would listen to him, and he didn't want him to be killed, and he was not happy when Herodias' daughter asked for Salome for the head of John the Baptist. So it's interesting. You have these two kings who got mixed up in a bad marriage or whatever, and they're getting tugged at by I want the righteous one to like me, and I want to get in with him, and they give in to their own sinfulness.
That's a good point. So this scene is followed by another scene where we have the famous, I think probably the most famous quote, I think, of Thomas More comes up, where Roper denounces the king, William Roper, who's Margaret's fiance, her suitor, as an enemy of the church and a minister of the devil. And, he's like, we should ignore the law and just take him out. We confound the law. The king is wrong. And Moore has this, and when the last law is down and the devil has turned around on you, where would you hide, Roper? The laws all being flat. This country's planted thick with laws from coast to coast, man's laws, not God's. And if you cut them down, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow them? Yes, I'd give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake. I mean, is this great quote about how the law exists to protect everyone, including for when you are the one in the strong position. It protects you when you also will eventually be in the weak position. The law is the law. It doesn't care. It shouldn't matter who's the one in power. I just love that quote in that scene, because it really sets the tone for the movie. It's like the law is the law. It's regardless of how my feelings about it or that sort of thing or what's convenient. So we have that, and then Cromwell lures Richie Rich to his corruption. And it's a sad tale to see Rich as he sort of descends down the steps. And at one point, Cromwell eventually gets him to betray a small betrayal of where's it? A small betrayal of Moore. He says, "I've lost my innocence," and Cromwell says, "You lost that some time ago. If you've only just noticed, it can't have been very important to you." And then he says something to the effect of, "It's going to get easier. Don't worry, the next time," and it does.
Yeah, and to Cromwell's. I was going to say credit, not that.
Yeah,
but to just notice how he knows exactly. Who Rich is or who he can be. I mean, it's just he's just got him pegged right from the get-go.
He's apparently this open book to everybody. I mean, he knows exactly what he's like. Yeah. And he's just kind of like incredulous, like, well, what do you mean? And he's trying to be all proper, but he has no, kind of like no hope.
What he says to me is like, what kinds of things would you report? And he's like, well, nothing said in friendship. He's like, Rich, seriously. He's like, yeah. He's like, seriously. He's like,
oh, well.
but depends on how much
really.
You give me. Yeah.
Seriously? So Thomas ends up resigning as chancellor when Henry demands that the bishops forswear allegiance to the Pope. And that's the final straw. But one important thing to note in the story of Thomas More is it's not that he stands up and says to Henry, "You're wrong, the Pope is right." It's that Thomas refuses to reveal what he thinks. He refuses to say one way or the other because he's loyal to both the Pope and the King, and he refuses to take a side in the sense of to swear allegiance to the King's what was it? The oath of loyalty for the act of succession, which is the one that would set aside his marriage, or to do anything of any sort, to say anything. And that's really the principle he stands on: is I have a right to be silent. I have a right to silence and to not incriminate myself, which is interesting to consider the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, he's really standing on that.
It's interesting. You're wondering, okay, how saintly is he if he won't, he's trying to save his life, but he carefully tells his daughter, it's okay. I can hold on to my life. I'm not required to do this as long as I don't sign the oath. He was even thinking, what's the oath say? I might be able to say it, but he can't. Mm-hmm. And he's very careful to construe the whole thing to basically be you can't know why I won't say that.
Right.
There's no way you can understand that. And even goes as far as later on is to say, actually, by law, my silence should mean consent. By law.
Right.
Not by his own
innocent until proven guilty. Right. My silence should not be considered a sign of guilt.
Silence means consent under the law. So he's really got it down to a science.
Yes.
A really well orchestrated thing that they cannot get him out of. They're all standing there trying to get him to stumble or say something that would prove that he's guilty. And he's like, no, I've thought this through. There's no way you got me. Unless, of course, what happens at the end.
Yeah, they try. He knows the law inside and out, and he's just will not be caught by it. I like there's a scene where the Duke of Norfolk, who is his close friend, is trying to get him to do the thing, to the hold his nose and just do the thing that will save him, and he tricks Norfolk into admitting he'd betray the king in favor of his friend Thomas, and Thomas like, how dare you admit to betraying the king? You should never betray the king. And he's like, oh, darn you all the heck, Thomas, for tricking me into that. I mean, it's just that's that scene where he says, it's what was the it's disproportionate. That's where the scene where he calls it disproportionate, his obstinacy. So Cromwell, through the middle part of the movie, keeps looking for ways to find a flaw in more, was he corrupt? Did you do this other thing? And he can't find anything. But when Thomas refuses to go to the wedding between Henry and Anne Boleyn, that's when charges are brought by Cromwell.
Well, and just to back up for a sec, because it's, the way they sort of get across this idea of this spooky network of spying, because so when Norfolk and he's leaving with the chain of office, and that's when they have that, that conversation. And he says, why are you talking to me? Like, why are you giving me all this, kind of drivel, Thomas? Like, why are you talking to me like this? And he's like, because I'm afraid. And he's sincere. And Norfolk says, man, you're daft. And he's walking away. And he's like, this isn't Spain, this is England. It's just like, and then later, when Norfolk's kind of pushing back against Cromwell a little bit, like, this is nonsense. You're wasting my time. And he's, it's like, are you threatening me, Cromwell? And Cromwell says, Norfolk, this isn't Spain. It's England. It's
yeah,
like,
that was great.
Oh, like it's just, oh, wow. And he looks for a second and he's like, okay. It's like thinking about it. So
yeah, there was the one where like they threw the rock at the kid and he like ran away.
Yeah,
to prove that there's people. Yeah. But that was a lot more sinister of a revelation.
Yep.
So Thomas, it is interesting how Thomas relies on his faith in the king's integrity for his own safety. Like he believes that the king's integrity will prevent anything bad from happening to Thomas, from trumped up charges, for false charges. He thinks that the king will, whatever else happens, the king will not betray the truth of the law, will not undermine the law, will not undermine. And that's really where Thomas gets the fatal flaw. It's not it's not a downfall, but it's the sense of he can't imagine the king would do this, and yet the king does, and that's what gets him. So Parliament passes a law requiring an oath of loyalty to the act of succession, and we mentioned Thomas honestly hopes it's worded in such a way that he can actually take the oath without swearing to do to something that he can't. But he can't. And so he's imprisoned in the Tower of London, and we get this really good montage of the seasons changing. So we see that he's in there for quite a while. And
for all the seasons. He keeps getting brought before the King's Council. He won't swear the oath. He won't say why.
Norfolk tries to get him to agree for the sake of fellowship. And I love this part. He says, and when you go to heaven for following your conscience, and I go to hell for not following mine, will you go along for fellowship? Nice. Yes.
Well, and that whole, that, I was thinking about it because I thought it would potentially, maybe come up, like if you have to pick a favorite scene, and it's hard to say, but I really think that inquiry, with Norfolk and Cromwell and Cranmer, the Archbishop, and then Rich is there off to the side, and they bring him from the Tower again. I think is that Hampton Court or wherever. I mean, it's they bring him there.
Oh,
and,
is that why they have the H's on there?
No, H is for Henry.
This was when he's in the Tower. Yeah, they bring. Oh, right. Yeah, and then they bring him in there, and he's just he's tired and he's been in prison and everything. But that's just, I think that's one of my favorite scenes because they're all at him and they all make like I don't know if you're like me watching it. I'm like, man, that's like, what would I say to that?
Right.
And the Archbishop presses him and he says something like, I'm not a legal scholar, but I can only guess your spiritual, situation. He says something like, oh my grace, if you're willing to, if you're willing to guess at that, I don't know.
right.
He one time he says to I think it's to Cromwell, you threaten like a dockside bully. And he's like, how should I threaten? Like a minister of the state with justice. Oh, justice is what you're threatened with. Well, then I'm not threatened. I mean, it's just like they can't. And also they woke him up. I'm assuming it's kind of the middle of the night. They're hoping to get him tired and like, being able to catch him when he's not at his best. And he's still, all three of them, they can't trip him up.
Right.
Well, and I love the look on, it's funny. You have to go back and watch if you didn't catch this, but like, it's something about, I forgot, Leo McKern, as as Cromwell. Something about the look he gives Norfolk when Norfolk, like, they're having all these like really specific debates, and Norfolk just bluntly says, he's like, look, I'm not a scholar, I don't know if it was lawful, like, but he just says that out loud. That's like saying the quiet part. Like he has no interest whatsoever. He doesn't care at all. He's just the party man,
Right.
But that, like, Cromwell's uncomfortable with that, like he's like, because but Norfolk's just like, but just look at these names, can't just, it's right before the line you mentioned, Dom. I just love that build up, he's like, dude, don't say that out loud.
So later on, Thomas has this moment where he's talking to Meg, and he says to her about taking an oath. He says, when a man takes an oath, Meg, he's holding his own self in his own hands, like water, and he cups his hands. And if he opens his fingers, then he needn't hope to find himself again. Some men aren't capable of this, but I'd be loath to think your father one of them. This is when his family was allowed to come visit him in the tower to finally persuade him, this last persuasion. And Meg has been, goaded to get him to change his mind, or he'll face the axe. And he says, like, an oath is an oath. A man has to be a man of his words. If I give up my word, if I break my oath, then what am I? What am I after that?
Yeah.
I'm nothing.
And that's the part where she has a couple of arguments, because she promised that she would try to convince him to take the oath. And one of them is like, haven't you done enough? I mean, aren't you kind of close enough to what you've given God this much? You spent a year in this tower. And he says, if we live in a state where virtue was profitable, common sense would make us saintly. But since we live in a state that aberrance, anger, pride, and stupidity commonly profit far beyond charity, modesty, justice, and thought, perhaps we must stand fast a little, even at the risk of being heroes. That was great, because like even at the risk of what might happen to me if I stand fast, like I might become a hero, which is not what he wants to do.
Right.
He said martyrdom is not what this is made of. He told his wife early on.
Yeah.
Yet, little did he know.
Well, and I think it's a whole other topic, of course, like, or we could do a whole show just on conscience, obviously, but we keep coming back to that's in this background. And there's and Dom, I might just share the links with you, actually, because I just heard the Acton Institute had a really fascinating interview just a few weeks ago with this, like, the world's premier Thomas More scholar. I just happened to catch it, and I was like, wow, we're talking about this soon. And just a lot of fascinating stuff about his life and his writings. And there was a really good section in that interview where they talked about how More understood conscience versus the way a lot of people today do. And this is where my teabag thing comes up, because I have, the guys can see this, the listeners can't, but I found, like, I don't even know where we got this. I have this, like, ridiculous, like, British, like, teacup that we got at like a flea market or something, and I never use it. And I just like, I'm gonna have tea tonight with this show, and I think I'm gonna put it in this cup, It's just
some crumpets.
Yeah, just make a theme thing here. And but I get the tea bag out, and these tea bags have like the little, whatever the thing is, like the little tag that you hold to dip it down. It has like a fortune on it, and they're all like new agey kind of thing. And the quote was, I just thought it was interesting. It said, "Your inner self is your inner guide." And I was like, that is exactly, in my understanding, not what Thomas thought. Like he had this sense that it's not about me. It's about this, like, in the sense that, it's his truest inner self, because he does talk to Norfolk about that, right? He says, is there any part of this that's not Norfolk's ambition or Norfolk's whatever, but just you, like just the man? But I think his understanding of conscience was what ours should be, namely that it's mysterious, but at the end of the day, it's your connection to God. It's this echo, the voice of God in you. It's this connection to what is real and what is right versus what is wrong. And like if he has, with the best of the intellect God has given him, discerned and realized that this is wrong, it's like he can't do it. It doesn't matter what anyone threatens. It's like his deepest allegiance to the truth, and being willing to die for it. And I think that's why he's such an incredible saint for right now.
Yep.
When there is, I mean, like, what isn't in question, right? In the culture, like, truth's whatever you want to make it. Well, you're never going to get martyrs from that.
Holding truth, you can, there is a kind of martyrdom that's coming, that's here, and maybe worse coming for those of us who hold to the truth. And I like that. Like, your conscience is that true self, that true part of you that holds fast to the will of God. I think that's really what you know, how conscience is portrayed in this anyway. It's the true self. It's who I really am when I'm holding tight, when I'm aligning myself with the will of God. The
most real.
Yes.
You know, and even and just back up one more, because I love it. It's funny. It's kind of, you know, a little philosophical, I guess. And so sometimes if I show students the scene, like, they might be like, I don't really know, but I love when he just says that exchange again with Norfolk, you know, back outside the house, and he says, like, you know, and, you know, you're going to give up everything, including the, you know, respect of your countrymen, you know, for a belief. And he's just dismissive, and he says, no, because matters is not that I believe it, but that I believe it. You know, he's like, I trust I make myself obscure.
That was a good line.
You know, it's just, but there's something about that. He's like, no, not.
That's like the tagline of the whole movie.
Right.
I trust I make myself obscure.
Yeah. Well, I think he changes the emphasis. He says, oh no, rather not that I believe it, but that I believe it. You know, like it's
not about the belief, the particular belief. It's about
his core.
It's about who I am.
Right. Yeah.
So in the Tower of London, I have to say that scene where he says goodbye to his family, man, that is a heart tearing moment. That is hard to watch.
It was great. I loved how he was like sitting there trying to woo his wife a little bit. This is great food that you made. I can't remember what she made. And your blouse looks lovely, the color at least, you know, and she's like, shut up.
So, I don't want to hear this. Like, do you think I'm so shallow as to want to hear your compliments on my food and on my clothing at this point? And he's like, I'm just trying to do whatever I can here. I'm a guy. I don't know. Like, I love the fact he just comes across as a regular guy, like a regular husband. I don't know what the right thing is to say here. What do you want me to say?
Well, and I don't know a whole lot about her, but you know, in the one of the biographies I was reading, I think she was a couple years older than him. He knew her through, you know, family friends or through, you know, associations, and his first wife died, and then he married Alice, and you know, it's interesting. So we meet him in, you know, like for this movie, you know, they've been married for many years at this point, but there is this little bit of a, like, she feels kind of on the outside because he's very close to Meg, you know, his daughter from his, you know, from his first marriage. And, you know, but I love how they show that, though, that he absolutely loves Alice, though, you know, with his whole heart. And even like that, I love some of their interactions earlier when he's like retiring and he's hoping to work out. He's like, shall I teach you to read? And she's like, God, no. She doesn't want anything's going to pull her into that, you know, like she's not interested in that part of his world. That's his thing. You know, it's just funny.
I think she feels like, you know, that between Meg and Thomas, they're like these intellectual giants, and she doesn't quite measure. I mean, who would, but you know, who doesn't measure up. And I think that was part of her reaction. So then we have this trial, this final trial that Thomas has to undergo. And this is where Richard Rich finally just purges himself, straight up lies about what happened. And Thomas notices that Rich is in a new outfit and he's got a chain of office. He's finally gotten what he wanted, which was power and prestige. And Thomas rolls out the line from Jesus, from the Gospels. What is the profit of man to gain the world and lose his soul? I mean, Rich,
but then he goes, but for whales?
But for whales.
Yes.
It's like, really? I mean, the whole world. Okay, but for whales? That was great.
Why? Yeah, for whales, Richard.
And I don't know if that's, I didn't look into it too much in terms of the trial. I don't know if that specific exchange was historically accurate, but he did say, like the line when he says something like, Rich, you know, in good faith, I'm sorrier for your perjury than my peril. I think the line is.
Yes.
And that's very similar to apparently, like, you know, testimony from, you know, whatever their version of a stenographer was.
Right.
You know,
whoever was reporting.
Yeah. So he very vociferously in his trial, you know, affirmed that what Rich was presenting was false, or being at least, you know, shaped to deliberately get him executed.
There is, even to the, at least in the movie, to the end, the jury's about to acquit him, and Cromwell basically bullies the jury into giving the verdict that's been predetermined. And then once he's convicted, he just reveals his true thought. This is now when it doesn't matter anymore.
Right. Like, why hold it in?
Why should I hold it in? And he unleashes in an eloquent way of, okay, this is wrong. What Henry has done is wrong, and the Pope is the Pope, and the Church is the Church, and so on and so forth. And it's such a great triumphant moment. I mean, really, even as he's about to be executed, and he is triumphant here, and it's
awesome.
He gives the line, "I am the king's true subject, and I pray for him in all the realm. I do none harm. I saw none harm. I think none harm. And if this be not enough to keep a man alive, then in good faith, I long not to live." Wow.
In part, I mean, his whole speech that he gives them, like, now that I can say what's on my mind, in part, it's the indictment is grounded in an act of parliament which is directly repugnant to the law of God and his holy church, the supreme governance of which no temporal person may by any law presume to take upon him. This was granted by the mouth of our Savior, Christ himself, to St. Peter and the bishops of Rome, which he lived and personally present here on earth. It is therefore insufficient in law to charge any Christian to obey it. And more to this, the immunity of the church is promised both in Magna Carta and in the king's own coronation oath. Mic drop.
The idea of giving that speech extemporaneously.
Yeah, right. Although,
and that's why he's talking. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if I would have maybe practiced it because knowing it was coming. But, well, yeah,
I just love how that whole thing kicks off. Like, he's just sitting there and he just seems very weak and everything, and then he's just very calmly, like, as they're about to pass sentence, he's like, "Excuse me," it's like,
isn't it
when I was
proper
practicing law, it was customary to, like, do you have something to say? Yes.
I might think of something. Give me a moment. It was amazing.
And let me ask you guys, I have a question about what you think about this, because I think, like, if I'm directing this scene, and a lot of it is, right there, you're seeing him, in the front, there's quite a bit of it. I'd forgotten this part, like, but quite a bit of it that's like from the door. Yeah. Like, looking at him, like, the back. And I don't know if that's meant to, somehow it just does something. It's very effective. And I wonder why they did that. But does it give you, like, it gave me the impression of him, like, he's like really like in the lion's den almost,
I think that's what it is. It makes him seem small in the face of all of this that opposes him. And yet he stands tall in that presence. And it looked, I mean, all of England is against him in that sense. Like, it's just, I think to me, that's what it looks like. The staging of that scene.
Yeah, and it's the whole color palette of the people in the gallery and the red of the judges and everything, all just kind of way it was all framed. There's a certain look there when I don't remember. I know I talked about the cardinal looking like a painting, but there was another time, and it may have been when he was becoming chancellor, and then this time too, it just had a very authentic 1500s, 16th century look to it, almost like it could be a painting. And it's just very well done the way I'll set it up. And not to say they were so in love with the shot, they just kept it there. But, I do like the idea of that you wanted this feel of, he's by himself. He doesn't have a lawyer.
Right.
He's all by himself.
It's him against everyone. And then the execution, he goes to the executioner. He tells the man to, be good at your job, basically. He pays the executioner, which was
he gives him a tip.
Well,
I mean, oh my God,
that was the custom.
Oh, it was. Holy cow! I'm thinking here's your tip, and here's a little extra, like, strong and true.
Yeah, well, buy something nice for yourself.
No glancing blows, please.
That's the thing is you want it to be one good shot. You don't want him to kind of weak wristed.
You don't want any.
You have to do it a couple times.
Which happened. I've heard. More than a few times.
It didn't have. So this wasn't part of the movie because Schofield was unshaven. But apparently, when Moore, the real Moore, went up for his execution, he said, he asked him, "Wait a second, let me move my beard aside, for it has committed no treason against the king." I mean, talk about man, going to your death with
Oh man, he was
with
like,
your boots on.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to be up there with St. Lawrence and with good lines at his death. You
No
know?
kidding.
Gotta make this count.
Turn me over. This site's done. But what the movie does have him say is, "I die, His Majesty's good servant, but God's first," and that's true.
And not at all to trivialize St. Thomas More's death by any means, but I was reminded just there for some reason. You remember the old Seinfeld episode where George is on that whole thing of like getting a good exit from a meeting, or something, or you make like a really memorable or funny line and then you just leave.
Right.
So that's like the ultimate version of, I'm going to deliver this, this comedic moment because I'm headed for something much better. And I hate, like, my gosh, the Archbishop. I don't know how historically accurate that is, but standing there, like right there, and then like, you send me to God. You're quite sure of that, Sir Thomas? It's like, dude, like, do you have to do any more to stack, like, your own sentence? Like, come on. But he says, he will not deny someone what's so blithe to see him or something like that. Like he's joyful at that moment.
And I like the fact that we get this narration at the end that kind of tells you, like, hey, betraying your oath did not save you. Because we were told Cromwell eventually gets executed for high treason.
Yeah.
The Archbishop is burned at the stake.
Right.
Norfolk was to be executed, but Henry died the day before. And Richie Rich, eventually became Chancellor of England and died in his bed. But the others, they didn't. They suffered it too. So it's interesting.
By the way, for what it's worth, if I have to choose between beheading and burning at the stake, it's beheading, of course.
Yeah. I have no idea of the historical context of why that happened to them, but there's a part of me that wonders if Henry VIII was like, I'm mad at you guys for not getting him to admit, and you made me kill him, so I'm going to kill you too.
Well,
that's
Cromwell
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Cromwell was up to his elbows in corruption to begin with, so I would not surprised that he'd commit high treason in some other manner. But I think just Henry was kind of paranoid. I think he was always looking for enemies around him.
I think I'm remembering this. It was a couple of years ago when, like when we moved into the house we're in right now 3 years ago, and all the stuff you have to do at that point. I was in between jobs, so I listened to a lot of podcasts as I was like caulking and fixing stuff, whatever. But Father Dwight Longenecker somewhere out there has some podcast from a couple years ago where I think he was reading sort of at length big sections from a lot of like Hilaire Belloc's stuff. So I think that might have been the source of it. But there were some very interesting things he had. I remember now there were like a half-hour episode on Archbishop Cranmer, a half-hour on Cromwell. Like I think he has some things out there that you might want to check out that go into that. I might go back because I think it gave some more of that background of what happened to those guys.
Interesting.
But,
yeah, I'm trying to think if there's other resources like that out there that tell more about what happened in this time period. But it's an amazing period of time with some amazing saints, both canonized and uncanonized, some martyrs and all kinds of people. It's a horrible time in the history of the Church and of England, but it's worthwhile finding out more about what happened. There was a book my wife had read about the martyrs, the English martyrs, and I'm trying to remember what it was. She really liked it. I'll have to, if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But it would be a good book to read about that period of time.
And I'll recommend too. There's a bunch of more biographies. The one I read that was just really in depth. It's not specifically like a hagiographical type of account. I want to look at some of those too. But it's just a really deep dive into him. It's I think Peter Ackroyd's the author, historian, did that one. So that's I'll pull a few and send them to you just for what it's worth. I'll try to get that Father Dwight stuff too. But
we'll try to get those in the show notes. Any last thoughts on the movie A Man for All Seasons? Mike Denz, any last thoughts on this? Anything we haven't covered?
No, I think it was great fun to talk about it. It was obviously very easy to get in the Catholic bent on this very Catholic movie.
Yes.
I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Excellent. And how about you, Mike Creavey?
Well, I thank Mrs. Roan for introducing me to this all those years ago. It's been a companion along the way. So
thank you, Mrs. Roan. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. We would like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV shows, including Camden O, Gretchen B, Thomas S, Jeanette F, and Joseph S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of A Man for All Seasons. You can let us know by commenting at sqpn.com/secrets or at the StarQuest Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuest Media. Yes, it's at Facebook. Or send an email to secrets@sqpn.com or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord, where we're having some great conversations about all kinds of things, including the topics of our podcast. Until next time, Mike Creavey, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of A Man for All Seasons.
Sure, yeah, my pleasure.
Mike Denz, thank you as well.
And St. Thomas More, pray for us.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Amen.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the secrets of movies and TV shows on StarQuest.